How about now? I just wanted to welcome everyone. We're going to wait a few minutes because we're expecting a full house. I really thank you for being on time, and people are still creeping in, so we're going to start in just a few minutes.
So my questions will come to stay there, and I'll moderate from that place, and my questions will come.
So you have to like...
Okay, and I'll walk through each of what we have here.
Make sure it's close.
There's three questions, and each of you will have time to...
I'm sorry I have to sit, but it would be
With
hard
us
not to.
having one less panelist today, because that person's also sick, we have a little bit of leeway.
How are you? Oh, I haven't seen you in a while.
I know.
Yes. How good to see you. I'm sorry?
How have you been?
Pretty good. I've had a bad leg. So it's been all my hours in doctor's office. They did surgery January, but it didn't help. But that's okay. I'm going to neurologist. But I follow your website. I'm following you all the time.
And I keep thinking we have to get you know, out there.
I will, but I keep following all your announcements and all your meetings.
Yeah, whenever you're ready to.
Okay.
Getting out there, yeah.
All right, I will. Of course. Good seeing you. Got your hair cut a little bit.
Yes.
Looks cute. I know.
I didn't know if
I don't
like,
have
I'm
any
willing
hair,
to
but I have
stay.
volume.
Okay, just wanted to
I
check
have thick,
if you needed
thick
for
hair.
anything.
So I keep it short.
I was hoping I'd run into you.
Oh, I'm really bad. Do you know Cassie? Yes. She has a coalition works for Massachusetts. Massachusetts.
This is your mental health. The older adult playground network. Yes. Oh.
Kind of this. Kind of the same, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so impressed with the TMA question back was done in terms of outreach with the older adult going. I don't think that's happening, you know, in the rest of the state, so yeah, in Western Mass.
And then here's a question.
Yeah, we need that so much. 'Cause I live in a senior residence. How are you today? Fine, thank you. Fine. Then you ask them a personal question like, you know, what did you do in your working year? And they'll say, and then that's it. There's no elaboration, there's no exchange. I'm sorry? Green leaves, right across from the Marriott. Yeah. And this lady has pretty white hair.
So I'm going to go with it. Yeah. So yeah, let's give them, so that's like 15, 30, 45, an hour. Yeah, let's give them each 5, maybe 6 years. Because we're going to answer this. So let's give them like 6, 7 years. 6 or 7 years.
How are you?
Good. You're the announcer?
I'm going to introduce, and Shirley's going to do the opening, and then I'm just going to announce the panelists.
Oh my goodness. All right, okay.
I'll get you from the front.
Maureen, do you want me to grab you some water?
Oh, that'd be great. One. Thank you.
I don't know if we're going to have a full house.
Hopefully people are just having a few more minutes.
Thank you, honey.
Oh, sorry. I hope these seats are empty. I hope they get people because so many people wanted to come and I said no.
Why? Oh, that's unfortunate. Me too.
Maybe they're coming. That'll fill in the empty seats.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Those will be needed.
Are you going to do the announcement?
going to test this microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes. We're situating with water. Coffee is almost done. There's a whole process of you have to turn the pot on before it actually gets made, so we missed that a little bit, but we're going to get that going. We do have folks viewing from home, so hello, everyone at home. Thank you for tuning in and joining us this afternoon. Give us one more minute to do a few logistics, and then we're going to get our program underway. Thank you for being here this afternoon.
They had buses that were supposed to come from the board. Yeah.
Well, they have disruption.
So many people, some friends of mine wanted to come, and I said, no, we have a reservation.
Yeah, this happens.
Yeah.
But people will trickle in too.
Oh, I just thought I should turn it.
Oh, good, you wrote all your answers all up too. I'm so afraid I'm gonna end up just reading them.
Honestly, I was so worried that you didn't know what
I know, me too. That's why I saw yours.
So I asked Maureen first, and she has notes. I was like, just because it's really hard for music train of thought, you know.
Yeah.
So it's just helpful. I try not to look at them constantly, but it's just helpful.
Yeah, well, I find that I add a little more as I kind of want to.
Yes. Yep.
But in the beginning, I kind of have structure, I just feel like I'm prepared.
Yeah, definitely.
No, you just feel more relaxed if you know you've got, you've got it. Right,
Yeah.
right.
You should get stuff.
The really funny thing is that I thought, I was going to do all kinds of reading to feel like I was really prepared, and then I started writing the answers, and it all came up. And I thought,
And there you know more than,
oh, okay, that's helpful.
got it. And I was thinking, there's only, we were originally planning on only 5 minutes each, so I was thinking, don't overwork the situation here,
So if you have more to say, you can.
Yeah.
I've trained this to stand by itself. I wish the buses had come.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Julie Schwager. I'm the Western Massachusetts Area Director for the Department of Mental Health, and I have the great honor of welcoming you here today. I want to start off, and by you I mean older adults, family members, supporters, caregivers, all of us. But I do want to start with some big thank yous. Our planning committee that put this all together today was from the Pioneer Valley Coalition for Suicide Prevention, Jen Mattoni, Karen Carrera, Cheryl Cooley, and Carmen Lee. Thank you so much. And from the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health, Celeste Clerk, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because she's ill, but it's a bummer. She would really like to be here. I also want to thank the committee, the whole coalition, the Pioneer Coalition for Suicide Prevention, which I'm a member of, proudly, and the Mass Department of Mental Health. Also, the Hadley Council on Aging and the Senior Center, who is hosting us in this beautiful location. This is just so beautiful here. And Hadley Public Media, who is live streaming our program today. Thank you for that. And also to all the other organizations that knew that this was an important thing to talk about and it helped us promote this event. Before I talk about our program, I want to read a letter from Senator Jo Comerford, because we invited her to speak today, but she wasn't able to come. And as always, she has some beautiful words for us. So Senator Comerford says, "Thank you to Jen, the Pioneer Valley Coalition for Suicide Prevention, and the Department of Mental Health for organizing this important community conversation. I am honored to have been invited to speak with you and send my sincere regrets that I had to be in the State House today. The people engaging in this conversation and your varied and important perspectives are a testament to the people power that you have cultivated. I always say that people power is the most powerful force in our democracy. It's what makes everything work. Your efforts to engage and understand these complex issues that older adults face and to share that information with your elected officials makes us all more powerful. So I thank you for participating, for engaging with each other, and for your critical work on these issues. So, why are we here? Well, I can tell you, for me personally, I moved my mom here this past September. She'd been living in New York for about 70 years. And she'll be 90 in 3 weeks, and yes, there's going to be a big party. My mom's an individual. She loves to read. She's not into the outdoors. I don't know where I came from. And she's shy, but she loves to engage with cherished family members and friends. And she cares about how people present themselves. I can tell you, if she was here right now, she would tell me to brush my hair. She had a long career as a teacher. She could speak 12 languages. And she, at this point in her life, she needs a fair amount of help to get things done each day. She's what I want for my mom is that she enjoys the last years of her life in the easiest and best way possible. She's met some new friends. She lives in a facility near here, and they all have different interests and backgrounds. They've all lived long lives, and they all need some kind of help at this point. But they're different. They're all different than my mom. And also, in their own ways, not just also, but over and above, they're all strong, resilient, capable individuals with a lot to offer each other. They're not a group of people with an issue to fix. They're individuals that need support in different ways. And we're going to talk about that a lot today. Older adults, whoops, sorry about that. Well, sometimes when I think I'm being helpful, my mom disagrees. I need some new skills on how to have supportive conversations with her. Supportive conversations and good connections are an integral part of emotional wellness and a good life. How to have supportive conversations and mutual connection are skills that don't always come naturally. They can be developed, improved, and built upon. And we're going to do that today. One of the things we know is that part of the big picture right now is the impact from years of COVID on older adults and their families because of isolation, inability to meet each other in person, and to touch and get physically close, vulnerability to disease and death, and having to be alone at the end of their lives, and collective mass burnout of the people who care about older adults in healthcare and in families. My mom has certainly been affected by these things, and it's going to be part of our conversation today. Aging is a universal experience, and yet many things about it are invisible, taboo, or unspoken. This makes mutual understanding, support, and connection more difficult than it needs to be for all of us. Our panel discussion will kick off with a question on invisibility. I think sometimes we forget what an important part of our community older adults are. We dismiss them. We don't see them. Today, we're hoping to open our eyes and learn some ways to have more supportive conversations. Some key takeaways that we hope you'll all get from today's program are offering older adults, their supporters, and their health networks new ways of expressing and connecting over experiences unique in this life stage and shared along the life continuum. Strengthening existing and supportive networks. Skills building towards better, more supportive conversations between loved ones. Resources, and we have resources for you today that you'll be getting, and an opportunity for connection, meaning making, and self-realization. I want to remind you that you should take care of yourselves. If you need to get up and walk around, take a break, get a snack. We have some delicious snacks, and I'm the one that didn't turn the coffee on, but it'll be ready soon. We have tea, some other drinks, and restrooms are right through that door. Take care of yourselves in any way that you need. We have an agenda. Thank you, Cheryl, for putting that back. And we're going to have a panel after I speak, or after a few other people speak. One of our panelists, unfortunately, was also ill today, but we've talked to our other panelists, and we're going to cover all 4 topics that we had intended to cover today, which are not on my piece of paper. Okay, Carmen will tell you about the topics. Sorry about that.
You want it?
No. So really, that's it. Thank you and enjoy the day. And I'm going to let Carmen introduce the panel.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I have a bum leg, so I'm going to have to sit. Old age has got me. Anyway, I taught my cane, though, to stand by itself. My name is Carmen Lee, and I'm a member of this planning group for this event, and also a member of the Pioneer Valley Suicide Prevention Coalition. We are delighted to have you here and introduce a panel of experts. We have intentionally sought to invite expertise rooted in multiple places of knowledge and wisdom. We desire to have people whose direct experience or practice, both personal and professional, invited us to address those questions on life and well-being that aging forces to the surface. Regarding relationships, we wanted people who have a record of attention to the art and practice of cultivating and nourishing supportive connections in themselves and in others, thus weaving a community. And finally, we needed expertise in the place of service, inviting people with decades of demonstrated professional and commitment to the service of well-being, connection making, and community building. We asked our experts to focus on one of the 4 areas of change: meaning, shared connection. Those areas are isolation and connection, sex and love, stigma and opening up, and grief and loss. Our expert panel today is Dr. Jane Mildred on isolation and connection. Jane is the president of the board of Amherst Neighbors, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to create neighbor-to-neighbor connections. Jane believes in interdependence at all stages of life and appreciates older adults as a diverse group of individuals capable of both giving and receiving mutual support. She is now retired. Tammy Herbert on Sex and Love. Tammy is the Vice President of the Disabilities and Elder Services at the Center for Human Development. She is a licensed social worker, human services board certified practitioner, mediator, and sexuality educator. Prior to joining the Center for Human Development, she was on the leadership team, and Tammy served as the director of service at VinVen for a segment of residential programs and a division director for residential programs at the Western Massachusetts Training Consortium. Maureen Callahan-Smith, down there, will speak on grief and loss. Maureen is a therapist specializing in trauma work on Boston's North Shore, who balances her work with writing, journaling, and art making, as well as with yoga and meditation practices. In 2021, she published Grace Street, a sister's memoir of grief and gratitude on her experience accompanying her younger sister through a late-stage cancer diagnosis. The books are right over here, too. Maureen's own history with perinatal loss and cancer has only deepened her interest in helping others survive traumatic experiences. And now over to our panel moderator, a member of our planning group and director of peer support services, to start our discussion.
That person has COVID too today. My name is Celeste, and Julie mentioned her collaboration and really spearheading and helping us move this forward. I'm going to step in as Celeste. My name is Karen. But before we do that, I want to give the microphone to Jen and Tony for a few minutes just to talk a little bit about our coalition, and then we'll get going with this amazing day.
Thank you, Karen. I don't know if this is on.
Move it forward.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Jen Mattoni. I am co-chair of Pioneer Valley Coalition for Suicide Prevention with Karen. And we are one of the state's 10 regional coalitions. We're an all-volunteer group, and we're composed of some professionals and then also just the general public, people who have had experiences related to suicide and or mental health. And we work on a whole variety of projects in 3 counties, Hampshire County, Hampden County, and Franklin County. And so we are delighted to be collaborating with the Department of Mental Health today on this community conversation. We did partner in the past with them on a community conversation pre-COVID. So this is the first one in quite a while that we've been working on with them. And we want to really thank you for being here. This is actually going to be the pilot of a similar program that we plan to roll out in our other counties. And some of the other regional coalitions have also expressed interest and excitement to bring events like this into their communities as well. So again, just so glad that you can all be here today. Please check out our table afterwards or come up and say hi. We're always looking for more people to get involved if you do have interest. And again, thanks so much. And I'll turn it over to Karen now to get the panel started.
Thank you, Jen. This is not a speed round at all, but we do have a method for how we're going to go about today. And we decided to create a really big poster to help guide the time marks for this morning and this afternoon. So we're going to take the biggest chunk of time to do our panelist discussions. We have these 4 pillars of content, and each of our panelists has prepared remarks and their perspectives and what they want to share regarding those pillars. We have a little bit of a time, constraint around that, but we will have questions and answer period after they're done, where you can ask whatever you'd like to. So if you want to jot down a question or anything like that, please do so. We're also going to have breakout rooms after our stretch break, where you can talk a little bit more in depth about these topics, bring up your questions again, ask anything that you'd like to. We're going to handle this in a very graceful and casual kind of way. We're all here together to learn something, to contribute as much as we can, and to walk away from this event knowing something a little bit different and feeling a little bit more warmth and love in our hearts. For our audience members at home, thank you for joining us today. Follow along with our program. Any of our resources or anything that we do for our handouts, or if you'd like more information, we'll help get you that information before we close out the morning, this first part of our afternoon portion. So let's get to it. All right. Our first pillar, and the way that we're going to couch the context of our first conversation is around invisibility. So think about that for a sec. Older writers and artists have often written about becoming invisible after a certain age, quote unquote. From your topical seat, isolation, connection, sex and love, grief and loss, and then we're all going to respond to stigma. What becomes invisible? Jane, would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Working? Okay. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm really happy to be here. This is actually the largest group of actual live humans that I've been in since before COVID. It's the first time I've spoken in any kind of a group for about 4 years. I'm feeling a little rusty. So I have written out some of the thoughts that I want to share with you, and I hope you will forgive me if I am looking at my paper more than I should be. I think once I warm up, I will do that less, but to begin with, I'm going to depend on the thoughts that I had as I was preparing for this. I also want to sort of contextualize my remarks in terms of sort of how I approach the whole topic of aging. And since the organization that I represent really embodies that perspective, I just want to say a couple of things about Amherst Neighbors, who I'm representing today. We're a membership, no-fee organization that seeks to create neighbor-to-neighbor connections, provide access to information and services, and empower elders to maintain socially engaged lives while living at home. We do this by training volunteers to provide concrete assistance to older adults in their homes and in the community sometimes, by offering social and educational programs, activities, and events, by challenging negative perceptions of age and aging, by promoting community engagement, by fostering interdependence, and by putting the talents, skills, and capacities of our older community members to good use. So that's my frame. So in thinking about the topic of invisibility, I realized that we are both, as older adults, and I say we as an older adult, are both visible and invisible in our society. And I think that it's important to note that it's our societal values that are responsible for this, not older adults. You know, as we all know, we live in a culture that values youth, or overvalues youth, and undervalues aging. For example, we seem more concerned about the age of our current presidential candidates than about their character or their policies. And we can see every day, or I see every day in my news feed, new cosmetic procedures and products that are aimed at addressing signs of aging as early as the 30s. I had a thing in my news feed yesterday about getting a brow lift in your 30 because your eyelids are starting to droop. Anyway, at the same time, social phenomena like the large number of baby boomers reaching retirement age, along with misleading claims about programs like Social Security, and the suggestion that the housing crisis is because older people are aging in place, have caused old people to be perceived as both a social and economic threat. We feel that. The impact of all this is that aging is viewed primarily as a process of diminishment. Older people as a group are viewed as a drain on society, and older people as individuals are often viewed as having little value and as having little to offer. This is heartbreaking to me. Consequently, we are visible as a problem, and we are visible for our problems. But we are invisible as an extremely diverse group of people who can and do contribute a great deal to our society. Our paid and unemployed economic activities produce trillions of economic benefit to our society. We provide a great deal of care to children and to other older people that is often unpaid and unrecognized. And many of us are movers and shakers in the civic and social affairs of our community. I see that, for example, when I go to our town council meetings and see how many of the people who are there asking for change are members of my own age community. So at the same time, we're viewed as at the same time as we are doing all these things, we're viewed as a monolithic group with a common set of special problems that are unique to our age group. But the reality is that older adults are an extremely diverse group of people who struggle with exactly the same range of issues and problems as everyone else in our society, including economic insecurity, housing issues, the effects of racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination and oppression, physical, emotional, and mental disabilities, it's not just us, and social isolation, which is a broad social problem, not just a problem that affects older adults. So in my view, while it's important to offer support and opportunity to connect for connection to those among us who are experiencing isolation, and for the many reasons that we will be discussing in the rest of this panel, it's equally important to the well-being of older adults in our communities to openly address the ageism and misinformation about aging that is so widespread in our society. So that's where I'd like to begin.
Thank you, Jane. All right, invisibility in the context of sex and love. Tammy, can you help us talk about what becomes invisible?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I want to say sex and love, we all want to be seen regardless of age. We want to feel wanted. Oh, can't hear me? Sorry. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. We all want to feel wanted and desired at any age. And unfortunately, older adults are not seen as sexual beings. Our culture worships youth and beauty. We don't feel seen. Women tend to start disappearing in their 50s, and men more towards 64, 65. We do know that men in our culture are held at a higher esteem than women in some situations. But unfortunately, we all live in a youth-fixated culture where people are afraid to age, and everything is around young and healthy bodies. This all contributes to invisibility. Not all countries are like the United States. There are many countries that value older adults more than the US does, and that's very sad. I'm going to give you a couple examples. Switzerland is the #1 nation for a range of policies on active aging. Japan is praised for adopting a comprehensive welfare policy, universal health care, and a universal social pension. These things should be happening here in the United States. Native Americans, we know, pass down all their knowledge to the younger people. Older adults are highly respected in Korea. In China, children care for their parents in old age. And in India, older adults are the head of the family and admired. As we know, in the United States, how many of those things I just mentioned do we feel are true here? So we have a lot of work to do to change stigma, to change social norms, to change people's opinions. It really is sad. Older adults may feel unwanted or as outsiders, which can cause withdrawal, social isolation, not feeling connected, and it really contributes to a decreased emotional wellness, dementia, and poor self-esteem. When actually older adults are more reliable. They're dedicated, punctual, and honest, focused, and efficient. Some people have multiple factors contributing to invisibility. We know it happens with older adults. Jane mentioned a bit about people with disabilities. I've worked with people with disabilities for 35 years. I've been a sexuality educator and relationships educator, primarily for people with disabilities, but many of them were also older adults. And people with disabilities are also invisible. So if you have a disability and you're an older person, I call it a double whammy. I've worked a lot with people of all ages and many older adults who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is the biggest group that I've ever been aware of, who people do not feel that they should have sex or they should have relationships. They're really viewed as perpetual children. And I can't tell you the countless family members and professionals who are not in support of people with intellectual disabilities having relationships or any kind of sex. So I've spent many years advocating for that because they are sexual beings as all people are. And they are and will become older adults as well. People in wheelchairs are seen as invisible. So if you're an older adult in a wheelchair, or if later in life you're going to need a wheelchair for some reason, I call that another whammy. Being invisible also affects all genders and identities. We call it LGBTQIA2+. So I'm going to tell you what all that means if you don't know. And the list keeps getting bigger because we want to include everyone, right? So most people understand lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. People who are transgender, as you probably know, feel that they're a different gender than what they were assigned at birth. Questioning individuals are people who are questioning their sexuality and their identity. Intersex people are people who are born with both sex organs, male and female, some of which aren't fully developed. Asexual is people who don't really have attraction to either gender or any gender or identity, and typically are not sexually active at all. That's obviously a small number of people. The T is for two-spirit, and two-spirit are individuals who feel they have feminine and masculine spirits. And we always put the plus at the end because we don't want to forget anyone. But just to give you a sense, because disabled people, LGBT plus people are all aging as well. But just to give you a little sense, about 1 million people in the US right now identify as transgender, and that number is growing very quickly. About 8% of Americans identify in the LGBT plus, and I say plus to include all those things I mentioned, and 13 to 20 million adults identify as LGBT plus. So again, I call this another whammy. So if you're a person who identifies in this group, has a disability, or is an older adult, although again, all these people I'm talking about, either are older adults now or will be, because we all will be, these all have such a significant contribution to being invisible. I really have to mention mass media and social media and all forms of media, because all we see is images of perfection, of beauty, of people with no visible flaws, perfect appearances, young and attractive. Of course, this greatly, and probably one of the biggest factors that contributes to invisibility. How many older people have you seen in the past month on TV or in a movie or any type of media? Let's say over 65, how many of you seen someone in the last month having sex or intimacy on TV, right? The majority are young, beautiful, perfect people, perfect looking people. But we are all sexual beings throughout the entire lifespan. So I'm a British wannabe. If there's any British people in the room, I love you. I want to be British. I actually did the DNA 23andMe, and I came out 65% British and Irish. So there's something about British. So I watch a lot of British shows. I love their accent. I have Acorn and BritBox, which is all British shows. They do cost money, but I love them. But anyone who watches those shows knows that there's normal-looking people on almost every British show I've ever seen. The women are not perfect. They look like we all look like. The men are not perfect looking. They look like, I see more females in the room, but for the men that are here, they look like normal looking people. Sometimes I see a female actress, she doesn't have perfect teeth. And it's really noticeable to me because every actress and every actor, I shouldn't say every, but very high percentage, have perfect teeth. So we just are getting these images constantly, every day, for our whole lives, that we're supposed to be perfect, we're supposed to be attractive. As Jane said, there's this huge increase in young people getting plastic surgery. I work with a woman who started getting Botox at 28, and she loves it. And I was like, you don't have wrinkles at 28. I hear about many people in their 30s. It's sad. I don't want to get plastic surgery at 54. So to see these young women doing this, it's just so disheartening because they're beautiful, just like everyone in this room is. And we're all going to get wrinkles. And wrinkles aren't going to hurt you. They're not going to cause any health problems. But it's just amazing the impact of what we see, what our cultural norms are, what our societal, the way that things go are, and the impact on everyone. You know, we're talking about invisibility today in older adults, and I mean, that's terrible. And now we're seeing younger and younger people that are doing everything they can to not look like they're getting older. And I really think it's an epidemic. You know, it's just terrible. So there's a big myth that older people do not have or want to have sex. Not true. People are sexual beings throughout the whole lifespan. I'll probably say that a few times today. But many people have sex in their 80s, 90s, and beyond. And then the last thing I want to mention about invisibility is healthcare providers. So healthcare providers, it shouldn't be this way, right? They're educated, they take an oath, they want to help people, they want to make people well. But healthcare providers can make you seem invisible or feel invisible. Like I said, I've worked with people with disabilities for many years. I started direct care when I was 18, and I worked my way up, so I've been to many, many appointments with people with disabilities, and also with my mom before she passed away, countless appointments. So I've witnessed this firsthand many times. People with disabilities, the healthcare practitioner barely speaks to them. They will speak to the person who's with them, the staff, the family member. They should be speaking directly to the person. Healthcare providers, and that's similar with older adults too. Healthcare providers, they may dismiss pain, anxiety, decreased emotional wellness, just because they think it's an unavoidable result of getting older, and that is not true. You know, they may feel that older adults are less deserving of treatment compared to their younger counterparts. That is not okay. Everyone deserves good health care. Everyone deserves to get support if they're struggling with their emotional wellness. I'm just going to tell you one little personal story. My mother-in-law was 75 a couple of years ago, and she went to her doctor, and the doctor told her, "You're 75, you don't need mammograms anymore." Well, fortunately, my mother-in-law spoke up, and she said, "I'm getting mammograms. My mother had breast cancer in her 80s. So she was going to fight to get her mammograms. A year later, she found a lump in her breast, and it turned out that she had bilateral breast cancer, which is in both breasts, which is very rare. Had she not spoke up for herself and advocated for herself, we would have had a very, very different result." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tammy. All of the things that we're talking about today are critical conversations. Isolation, connection, grief, and loss are things that we, usually connect to a conversation when we're respecting and engaging our older adult population. Rarely do we talk about sex and love, or do I hear people talk about sex and love? So we wanted to shake things up a little bit today. And we hope that, thank you so much for being willing to talk about this and all your work in that topic. And throughout our questions, you'll hear a little bit more of that thread. And we're bringing it to the table. We're putting it on the forefront so that we are not invisible in having those kinds of conversations. Thank you. Maureen, from your perspective of grief and loss, that happens, as we age and we go through the lifespan. It's an inevitable thing that we're going to come across. From your work, from your learning, from your perspective, talk a little bit about grief and loss and invisibility.
Thank you. Can you hear me? First, I just want to thank the group, the coalition that put this day together, and thank you for being invited. I grew up in Western Massachusetts. I lived there till I was in my mid-30s and went to social work school in Boston. But we both have families back here and are back here all the time, and this area is close to my heart. So, and I also just want to say, there's no one in this room who has not been an experiencer of grief and loss. Each one of us carries our own grief and loss from our whole lifetime. with us. So I just want to acknowledge that we may all be in very different places with it. And for some, the conversation today may be very comfortable. For some, it may be touching on things that they would rather not touch on today. So as somebody pointed out at the very beginning, I think it was Julie, if people need to move around, if people need to go for a walk, I just want it to be okay that we are in the place where we are with our grief history, and we're not all in the same place, in the same way that all older adults are not the same. We get sort of lumped together. So one of the things is that by its very nature, a broken heart is invisible, right? People can't see. There's an introduction to the book that I wrote where I talk about the shattered crystal in my heart that represents the loss of my sister, and how I just carry that crystal in my heart. And sometimes it's shining light on things, and sometimes it's shining rainbows, and sometimes it's shining shadows. And that those things don't show up when you look at me. It's all invisible in here. And we each have that. I talk about walking around in the world right after I lost my sister, and we can all relate to this with a bashed-in heart. It felt like around the time when Kathy died, there had been the Oklahoma bombings. So you know from that this was a long time ago. That's why I can talk about it without falling apart. But there was a lot of images in our media of the buildings, and it felt like that's what was in my chest. So I talk in the book about feeling like I had a bashed-in heart. One obvious answer to the whole thing about grief and loss as we age is that there's more losses as time goes on, right? And we live in a society that makes there's sort of a double message. There's a lot of books and a lot of podcasts now about grief and loss, which is wonderful. But in polite company, it's when we're out with friends or we're at a meeting, we can still feel sort of stigmatized even by the fact that we've had this loss, like we don't want to bring the room down. I've had that feeling so many times myself. Women can have it after a miscarriage, the sense of, I don't really want to bring this up because it's such a downer. So that in itself can create a stigma and leave one feeling isolated, even more so in the loss. We give a lot of attention to the tragic stories of premature deaths. Those get a lot of coverage, and we read about them, the person that dies at 46, the person that dies at 32. But as we age, we experience more and more losses, and yet strangely feel less and less seen, because somehow those losses get normalized and sort of fade into the background. And it's harder and harder for us to feel validated that the loss, I think about my mother, her best friend, Mary Loeffler, they would talk every single day. They were old nurses. They had worked at the North Adams Hospital for decades. And Mary ran the ER, and my mother ran one of the med-surg floors. And for years, they talked every single day. And when my mother lost her friend Mary, that was a friendship of like 60 years. They had known each other since nursing school. And it somehow, because they're both old, it seems like, well, Mary passed on. And yet a devastating loss to my mother. And we can all relate in this way. The longer somebody's been part of our life, the deeper that loss is experienced when they're not at the other end of the phone so that we can cackle about the latest, thing that happened to us. So there's this funny thing that happens with that, with our losses as we age somehow seeming to be less attended to somehow, and yet nonetheless devastating. I'm, you know, reminded as I'm thinking about that of, I read a lot of books years ago from the poet May Sarton. She had these beautiful journals that she kept, and every time a new one came out, it was like, and I just remember her reading this line that stayed with me forever, and I've said it to so many people when they've lost a parent. She said her mother had died quite late in her life, and she said, when you lose your mother, it's like the sun has gone out of the sky. And there's this just kind of thing that you've oriented, good, bad, or indifferent. God knows we can all have very complicated relationships with our parents. But it's like we've oriented to that person our whole life, and when that orientation is gone, it's just profoundly disorienting. So these are all things that can kind of be like earthquakes that happen, and yet they're way back here in terms of our society. We're not really easily invited to share them, to bring them forward, and that's kind of, I think, some of what we're trying to talk about today, which is how to break through that somehow. I think another way that things have changed in terms of the visibility and the communal sharing of grief is that for all kinds of reasons, people have moved more and more away from traditional religion, traditional organized religion. There's more and more of a sense you hear over and over again from people of, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And so people are kind of left in that category, and I'm up there, having to figure out your own way to do your grieving and your mourning. The communal, centuries-old rituals that people participated in for decades and decades and centuries may not serve us so well, or we may find that even though we've put that part of our life over here for a long time, when the loss hits us, we really want to go back to that old familiar ritual. It may be all kinds of things, but I think that's another way that we've jettisoned some of the association with institutional religion, but we haven't quite developed the communal, spiritual ways of coping with loss to replace them. So, and when it hits, those things become very important. So, you know, the question for us is kind of what path has our own personal spirituality taken? How is it a source of strength for us? How might we be able to connect it in some way to ritual that is meaningful for us? Quite spontaneously, I grew up Catholic, so quite spontaneously over the course of Kathy's illness, we ended up doing several rituals that just arose out of a need and that was extremely meaningful to me, but I know that just got made up and pulled out of our back pocket as we went along. One of them was we had piles and piles of papers left from all the hospitalizations, all the medical instructions, all the discharge summaries that I just couldn't see putting in the trash or putting in the recycle bin. They just felt, I think the word I used in the story is they felt too epic or too sacred. I just couldn't throw them away. So we went to Ireland and we burned them. We went to the beach in Galway Bay and we made a big fire and we burned them. And I didn't really plan that. I just knew I had to do something other than putting them in the bin. And then when we began talking about going on this trip, it became clearer that that's something we could do. So I really invite people to be thinking about your own personal meaning-making system and how you would want to have your own death dealt with and how you want to deal with those that you've lost going forward. And I think the other thing that I would just say is obituaries are kind of less available to us. They're very expensive. I'm hearing people that I'm working with saying, we wanted to run it in the Boston Globe. Have you heard how much they're charging now? So that even that kind of tribute to somebody's life that encapsulates, so often you read them and you go, wow, I never knew that about that person. They really encapsulate a lifetime, are less and less available. I had a profound teacher who was very involved in my writing early on, Kate Ronsahoff, who died several years ago and had an incredible life as a teacher of art. And there has never been an obituary about her. And these kind of things just sort of stay with you. Like, that's a life that and I didn't know enough about her, her earlier life, to be able to craft one. But those are losses, I think, that make us a little more invisible. And the last thing I'll just touch on is that at this stage of life, I think we're very often preoccupied with life review. Often at very inconvenient times, like 3 a.m., where we're replaying scenes in our mind, or we're playing relationships, like, how did I lose track of that person? Or how did that little thing that happened between us turn into I haven't seen them in 18 months? Those things start coming up, and it's really normal. There was a wonderful book that came out when I was in graduate school. I think it was called Reminiscing, where somebody had done a real study of this. It was a beautiful book. But it presented it as really a task of later life, that reviewing our life and reminiscing. And so I think one of the things we can do with one another is to see that as not just being old people and living in the past, but recognizing it and honoring it as something that's a very valuable, important life task, and creating spaces, and I'll probably talk about this more later, to hear one another and to listen to those reminiscings. So that's just some thoughts.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I'm thinking about, I unfortunately have experienced a lot of loss in my life since being young. And one of the things I heard over and over was, they had a great life. They lived a long life. And that was a model of how you respond to other people who are coming to pay respects to you, or to talk about, like, their own feelings. And the person who's my mother, who I watched quite often, responding back, was in a role of almost taking care of those who came to take care of her. And I had a very significant loss myself 6 years ago, and I found myself doing the same thing. We don't talk about death or aging, really, in our Western culture. And one of the things that we're trying to do today with this event is break stigma in a bunch of different layers, a bunch of different ways, different categories. But having these conversations is our first steps towards breaking that stigma. One of the things we talk about in suicide prevention work is to make connections and to have the hard conversations and to really bring out what people are feeling as a way to have people own their space, be seen, be valued. And we are on our way to creating that space for, hopefully for all of you feeling that today with us. We do have a second part to that question, but I am looking at the time. And so in any way that you can contribute to being seen, or how you would want to shift or change the next two categories we're talking about, please pull from your notes and your thoughts. And interject anything around stigma that you feel resonates in your category. We're going to go to question 2 right now. And we're going to talk about the body, older adults, aging, and the body. Many layers, many different things to consider in this particular pillar. So aging through all stages of life is often accompanied by physical shifts and changes, strength, stamina, ability, pain management, all those things. How, from your perspectives, your platforms, your areas of expertise, how are your areas affected by aging and the body? And so, Jane, for you, in context of isolation and connection, how would you, entertain that question and give us some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say at the most basic level, physical and mental limitations can cause people to isolate themselves or to be rejected and misunderstood by people. So, for example, balance and other mobility issues affect people's ability to go out into their yards or into the common rooms or out into their communities, to say hello to people, or to engage in activities that have allowed them to connect with them and with other people in the past, such as going to worship services and clubs and that kind of thing, from volunteering, and even from frequenting businesses where they have been, where they're known and recognized. And I'd like to just interject at this point that when we talk about connection, people's need for, well, all people need connection, but the kinds of connection and the amount of connection that people need varies a great deal among people. So some people need to be around people a lot or all the time. Other people are perfectly happy by themselves with their hobbies and their reading and have much less need to be around other people. That doesn't mean they don't have a need, but it's really important not to assume that everybody needs the same amount of connection or the same kind of connection that you do. I was listening to NPR, I don't know, a month or so ago, and there was a program on neighbors, and somebody, I don't know if any of you heard it, but it was really interesting because the person was talking about how important neighbors can be for older people, that, you know, just having someone say hello to you and know your name, or put your newspaper up on your porch when it's snowy, or shovel your walk, or come by with, you know, something baked, can be really, really significant for an older person who's isolated. So, you know, we can feel connection in small ways as well as big ways, and those small ways make a big difference. An example of that I'll share is that I have a parent who will be 98 next month, who still lives alone in his own home, takes good care of himself and his house, drives and helps other people. But his main source of connection is a little restaurant that he goes to that's around the corner from his house, where all of the servers know his name. And when he comes in every day for lunch, well, 6 of the days of the week for lunch, people say, "Hi, Peter, how are you?" They call him when he doesn't show up for his lunch. The servers all come and sit down at his table for a moment, if that's all they have, to just check in with him. And that is his source of support. He has outlived everyone, and really is very isolated. But 6 days of the week, he feels connected. And on Sunday, when the restaurant's closed, he's depressed. So, you know, again, there's lots of different ways to connect if you have the opportunity. But I want to talk about a few other physical limitations that can cause people to avoid meeting or engaging with people. Things like having tremors in your hand or having painful arthritis can cause people to avoid, or doing things like shaking hands or having physical contact. People who have difficulty with speech or with hearing might avoid situations where they might feel like they're not going to be understood, or they're not going to understand a conversation. So although they might want to be a part of that, they might feel that they can't. And unfortunately, this reluctance or avoidance of these kinds of connections might cause other people to view the older person as either standoffish or difficult, and to then further isolate them. So we really need to be open to thinking that there may be many reasons why the response we get from an older person is different than the response that we might have expected. People who are very concerned about how they look, people who have spent their lives, you know, feeling very good about their appearance or very concerned about their appearance, may avoid being seen because of changes in their appearance, either due to aging itself or due to things like arthritis in their hands that make it difficult for them to engage in the same kinds of grooming behavior that used to allow them to feel good about how they present themselves. People with memory issues can be really afraid or ashamed by changes in their cognitive abilities, or they might be afraid of being found out if it's something that they don't want people to know. And so they avoid connection because of fears of being judged or of being viewed as incompetent. This is not an exhaustive list, obviously. I just wanted to stress that it's important to understand that there's a lot of different reasons why people might avoid contact. They're not all psychological. And people might avoid contact even if they long for it. So we often need to do some bridging to slow down, to watch out for verbal and nonverbal cues, that people might need us to speak more loudly, which not all older people do, or that people might be uncomfortable with certain kinds of physical contact, and so on. Anyway, asking questions can be helpful, and offering alternatives, such as help with transportation for people with mobility issues, or offering other ways to communicate for people who have difficulty with speech or hearing, or just simply acknowledging and understanding the limitations that people bring to the encounter can be helpful.
Thank you so much, Jane. And your term bridge, I think, was a really good visual for, say, for myself in relationship with an older adult, or if you are a caregiver with someone in your life who has experienced some of the things that you were talking about, for that person to have a mindset shift, right? Maybe we're talking about a mindset shift for the people who are in relationship with older adults and older adults themselves for the mindset shift around empowerment. Tell me a little bit more about why you don't want to go outside. Like those conversations where you might step back and no one wants to hear it, or I feel a little bit of shame to talk about how hard it is to keep my hygiene like it used to be. But you're saying to bring it out, have those conversations, and the people who are in the atmosphere of all of us together to be those bridges and to honor that space. Thank you so much. Tammy, we're going to talk a little bit about sex and love. We do need to be physical with that, right? Sex and love. One's an act, and we have feelings around it. We can talk about what happens in the older adult context when maybe your body isn't working as well as it was before, that you have pain limitations, all kinds of limitations, maybe cognitive limitations too, but the desire for intimacy and connection remains.
Okay, so the first thing I want to say is you all look attractive to me. But it's really important that you feel attractive. And keep in mind, we are changing, our bodies are changing, we look older, but there's many qualities that contribute to attractiveness, right? It's not all about physical appearance. For example, my husband is so funny. He cracks me up every day. That is such an attractive thing. Personalities are attractive. So yes, we all worry about appearance, and that is a big part of attractiveness, but just because you're aging doesn't mean you're not attractive. And so please try to believe that you're attractive. We know as we age, our health changes, but you can still have satisfying love and sex in most cases with a changing body and with health concerns. So I do want to touch on health concerns as it pertains to intimacy and sex and changing bodies. Because as we age, there's a lot of things that we worry about regarding illnesses, disabilities, medicines, surgeries that can impact intimacy, relationships, and sex. But it is important for your healthcare practitioner to hear about when you're dealing with a significant illness or disability or surgery, that, for your doctor to treat you effectively, they need to understand that. But a lot of people are not comfortable speaking up to their healthcare practitioner about sex issues or problems, regardless of your age, and sometimes it is harder for older adults. There are some things that could assist with this. Patient portals are a good thing because if you're not comfortable starting the conversation in person, you could send a message. Sometimes initiating the conversation is the hardest part. So you could start that conversation through a portal. And telehealth. Some people are much more comfortable talking on telehealth about topics that we're a little uncomfortable about. You only see yourself from the waist up, so you can hide your anxiety, your hands down low. And I know it's a myth that older people are not good with technology. I know many people who are older than me, and I think I'm decent with technology, but I know many that are better than me. But there are some people who aren't that experienced. So get support with the portal or telehealth if that is something that you're worried about. So some things that can really impact sex is alcohol. You can have erection problems if you have alcohol. If you drink alcohol. You can have a delay in orgasm from alcohol. But what I say is if you know you're going to have sex, don't drink alcohol that day. Or drink less. I will say, though, if someone drinks a lot frequently and every day, it may be hard to address those sexual issues. Lower emotional wellness. Maureen talked a lot about loss. There's other reasons that our emotional wellness may not be good for many, many reasons. That can have an impact on intimacy, relationships, and sex. Lack of interest in activities you used to enjoy. Rely on your support network. There's, many treatments to help emotional wellness. Everyone is different and a unique individual, so not everyone wants to take medication. Not everyone wants to go to therapy. You may have an informal support network that can help you. But of course, there are other treatments because your emotional wellness is so important, as you know. Diabetes is a big one that affects sex. This is one of the main illnesses that can cause erectile dysfunction. Uncontrolled diabetes can cause yeast infections in women, which can be painful, embarrassing, and make sex uncomfortable. But we know diabetes is treatable, so if you can get your diabetes under control, it's really going to decrease these issues. Heart disease, people can be scared to have sex if they have heart disease, and if they've had a heart attack or any type of cardiovascular event, many people are scared. Partners are scared. People are going to worry that they're going to have another heart attack if they have sex. But that's not usually the case. Most people with heart issues can still have sex. But let me say that you do want to check with your cardiologist because there is a small percentage where there may be some significant risk. But heart disease or having a heart attack does not necessarily prevent you. With heart disease, it can be harder to get an erection. It can take longer to, experience intimacy. But what I say about that is that's more time with your partner. That's more time with intimacy. Incontinence is another one. Loss of bladder control or leaking of urine obviously is more common as we grow older, happens a lot to women. But there are things you can do about it. Extra pressure on your belly during sex can cause urine to leak. So try a different position. It's very important to empty your bladder before and after sex, which will help with urine leakage. We also know it can prevent UTI, so not a bad thing. Incontinence is very treatable. There's medical treatments, bladder control training, and behavioral and lifestyle changes. If you don't know what bladder control training is, it's about getting rid of habits, reduce frequency and urgency and leakage, understanding the message that your bladder is sending you, knowing when your bladder is full or not, and doing a bladder diary, and tightening pelvic floor muscles, which is also called Kegel exercises. Medications. There's a number of medications that affect sex, right? They can cause erectile dysfunction, difficulty ejaculating, difficulty with arousal, orgasm, reduced sexual desire, and vaginal dryness. Some of the meds that cause this are blood pressure meds, Parkinson's disease meds, cancer meds, antidepressants, antihistamines. So there's a number of them, but there's many alternatives to medication. So if you're taking a medication that's impacting your intimacy or your sex life, most medications have an alternative. Like there's so many blood pressure medications. So if you're having a problem with that, talk to your doctor about trying a different blood pressure medication. Obesity can be a problem for erectile dysfunction. Fortunately, there's more and more and more treatments coming out for weight loss that is being successful for a lot of people. Stroke. A lot of people think if you have a stroke, you can never have sex again. You may have some weakness or paralysis. That's not true. Many people can change positions, and there's some medical devices that may help. Even some people with paralysis from the waist down can still experience orgasm and pleasure. Additionally, there's multiple surgeries that many of us have to have that can impact your sex life. Hysterectomy. It's a myth that sex is not going to be as good after a hysterectomy. Most women report that their sex life is the same or better. Mastectomy, that can be a tough one for women. That definitely can contribute to feeling unattractive. People worry greatly that their partner is not going to think they're attractive, so it can definitely decrease your emotional wellness. It definitely can make you feel less desirable. But talk to your partner about it. Get support. There is options for reconstructive surgery. Not that everyone wants to do that, but there's special bras that you can wear. It's not your fault that you had to have a mastectomy, and you should still be able to have a satisfying, life with love and intimacy and enjoyable, pleasurable sex.
Tammy?
Yep.
I have one question. So in talking about, the encouragement to talk to your partner, what if at this stage in life you don't have your partner any longer and you don't have, a reliable source to, share that intimacy with? Do you have thoughts on how to help people work through that?
Yeah, it's so critical to make connections. Healing happens in relationships. We know that. So it is tough when people are isolated and feel like they don't have anyone. But find ways to widen your circle. Join a community like this community. Do you have any loved ones, family, friends that you could reach out to? Again, not everyone wants to go to therapy. That might be a place to get support. You can call me. I'll talk to you.
And maybe not so much, you were talking about the physical act of sex and love, and there is very much meaning and fulfillment within an intimate, a soul relationship or a connection with someone, and perhaps if the physical aspects of engagement with someone else isn't in front of you right now or possible, that there are levels of connection and intimacy that can be just as fulfilling or a really good substitute. But the bottom line is that it's critically important throughout our lifespan, and that there are people like Tammy and experts who can help you walk that path and pave that way for you. Are there any other things you'd like to share around that?
Yeah. Well, Jane just kind of whispered.
What did Jane whisper?
I should have thought of this too. You don't need another person to have sex.
Thank you for saying that out loud. Yes.
Right. Thank you, Jane. Okay, prostatectomy. In the old days, if you had your prostate removed, your sex life was pretty much over. In most cases, that isn't the case anymore. And as we know, prostate problems can cause urinary incontinence and erectile dysfunction. But they can use a nerve-sparing technique, which allows many men to regain function. Strength and stamina, obviously this relates to a sexual life. You know, there are exercises you can do. I'm sure many of you exercise. If you've lived a sedentary life, you can do small things because any increased exercise will help your stamina. You know, aerobic exercises, balance, walking. You know, if you have medical concerns, this can be done moderately. But walking is great. You know, they have all these things now, apps and watches that can track your steps. Just every day, take a few more steps, and it really can make a difference. Pain management and chronic pain, those are tough, I know. You know, arthritis, joint pain, it can make sexual contact uncomfortable. Exercise, drugs, and possibly joint replacement therapy might be an option. Rest, warm baths, changing the position or timing of sexual activity. Obviously, if you're in a lot of pain, it might not be the right time. Chronic pain also can be tough. You know, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to prevent you from an intimate relationship and can often be treated. Regarding the change in body, obviously we know normal aging brings all kinds of physical changes for all of us. And, you know, it can interfere with your ability to enjoy sex. We have weight changes, skin changes, muscle tone changes, and then some older adults, some younger adults, because we talked about 30-year-olds, just don't feel comfortable in their aging bodies. And we know that's societal pressure. They worry that their partner will not find them attractive. But talk to your partner about how you feel. Because if you do have a partner, and I know not everybody does, do you feel not attracted to your partner because of their aging body? Probably not, if you love the person. So why would you assume that they feel that way about you? But again, talk to your partner. Like, open conversation is just so wonderful because it also can create deeper intimacy, deeper connection.
Tammy, I do want to make sure we get to our other
Okay,
questions.
sorry.
So,
Let me just see if there's anything
she'll
else
be
big.
available, you know, if you want to catch her during break or
Okay.
come to our breakout room around that. We could do a whole day
Yes,
on this
yes, we
topic for
could,
sure.
yes.
And everything you're talking about is so important. We are breaking the stigma by having this conversation today, and thank you.
Thank
you
you.
mentioned change in body and change in all of that. Any type of change that we experience, it means something's different. You're either losing something, something's different, it morphs into something else, and in the context of all of that, there could be some grief and loss within that. Tammy, can you talk a little bit about Maureen, talk a little bit about that from your chair and what you know about
Sure.
change?
And my notes for this particular part are a little bit briefer than my other notes, so I'll be a little bit brief. But one of the things that I thought of immediately is that the changes that our bodies are going through cause their own grief, of course. You know, we're getting used to all kinds of things being different in this kind of earth suit we're wearing. And so that in itself has its own sense of loss and its own sort of grieving process. And it can be significant. We have sort of idealized versions of ourselves that we carry around with us and you know, love those memories of our younger selves. And now we're dealing with, you know, I think of my great aunties and my grandparents who used to be at all the gatherings, and I think me and my cousins, we're it now. We're the aunties and the grandparents. And I think of my dad, you know, at one point saying to me, you know, honey, I still feel like I'm 35 inside, but I look down at these hands. Whose hands are these? And that sense of our body not quite feeling like it fits who we are in here. So I think that in itself has a loss associated with it and grief. And I think one of the ways, that I thought of it last week, I'm having to have a tooth pulled. And I'm kind of horrified, like, I don't want to have a tooth pulled. And there's a sort of grief process going on. I feel a little insulted that there's something wrong with my tooth. And so we have to make these adjustments. How do we make the mental adjustment to deal with the fact that this is going to keep on coming, kids? The changes are going to keep on coming. And I think of a couple of things. I think of the ones we've lost being kind of giving us some perspective. I think my sister's not here. She died when she was 46. And I've had all these years since her passing that I've gotten to live. I've gotten to see her grandchildren. She never got to see them. I've gotten to have them in my lap and in my life. She never got that. So some sense of perspective that even though we've got these things happening in our bodies that are difficult and challenging, we're the lucky ones. We're still here. So that brings some perspective for me. I think, I'm a huge Beatles fan. I think John Lennon, George Harrison have been gone for years. These geniuses. How did I get to have 33 years more of life than John Lennon had? How did that happen? And what am I doing with it? And I don't say it to torture myself at all, but it's a way of giving some perspective to how blessed we are to still be here on a beautiful morning, and or even on a crappy morning. So the other thing is some humor. There's a lot of humor in my family and in my household. And I think of Grace and Frankie. We're big TV people too. And the fact that that program that was on Netflix for like 7 seasons, I think, took a lot of these things we're talking about and put them right out there. Everything from assisted suicide to broken hips and inability to have sex anymore. All of it came out, and with some humor. And I think that that's just another way that sometimes with our close friends, we can just sort of chuckle at these infirmities that are happening, but we are still here. That's sort of the good news. And also another thing I think is that everybody ages so differently. We can be the ones who are less able than we used to be to get around, and we can have friends who are, getting ready to climb Mount Washington or something. People at all ages are at very different places of capability. So there can be a little bit of jealousy or a little bit of shame. The word shame came up a few minutes ago, and I think that can be associated sometimes with some of these losses. We can feel sort of less than if we're not able to go kayaking on the river in New Hampshire the way our friend just went. So I think bringing consciousness to the way we're talking to ourselves and the way we might be comparing ourselves either to our idealized former self or to our friends is another way of just sort of getting back some perspective about the losses that are happening. So that's kind of...
Thank you so much for that. We are going to move into our final question of this afternoon, and it has to do with meaning making. In the work that I do, that we do at the Coalition, finding hope within a struggle or a crisis or something like that is a protective factor that we're hoping people will connect to want to stay, to want to be here, to want to contribute and be a part of this world in any way that they can today. And also within a loss, making meaning of something that's been painful for you, or the experiences that you've had can really give you that different sense of perspective and continue with the hope that you live with day to day. And so as we think about all the conversations we have had so far, the idea of stigma, the idea of isolation, sex and love, grief and loss, emotional wellness, and knowing that giving space and giving voice and a place and time for someone to tell their story and to share, who they are, where they come from, what was important to them, what is important to them. Can you speak a little bit more from your chair around older adults? And Jane, we'll go through the panel again this way. Isolation and connection and making meaning. What are your thoughts around that?
Hi. The question, as it was given to me in preparation,
go ahead,
was about having conversations and
yeah.
helping people make meaning. So I want to start with just some thoughts that I have about having conversations as older adults and with older adults. Because I think some people don't feel like they know how to talk to people who may be different from them, or people who may have life experiences or challenges that they don't necessarily feel they understand very well. So I'd like to say a few things about having those conversations, and then a little bit about what I feel that older people can contribute to those conversations. So first of all, I said when we met to talk about this panel that if you've met one older adult, you've met one older adult. And I think we've all stressed that this is a very diverse group of people. And so if you want to understand one individual that you're having a conversation with, it's really important that you examine your own assumptions and beliefs about that person before you engage in the conversation, and that you continue to examine those assumptions and beliefs as you're engaging in the conversation. So the first thing I would say you need to do in any conversation, really with someone of any age, is to show generous or genuine interest in who they are and how they experience their lives. This means asking open-ended questions and truly listening to their answers. So truly listening means, not thinking as they're talking about how you're going to respond, or a story about your aunt that you maybe think gives you some, insight and understanding of how they're experiencing them, but really genuinely listen to them and suspend all of your own sort of inner clamoring, as someone once said. And we also need to avoid making responses and asking questions that assume things about the person's experience, and not draw any conclusions about what they're saying until we believe that we truly understand what it is that they're trying to say. So, for example, I think we have all sort of learned some kind of therapy speak in the way we talk to people sometimes. So when somebody mentions a loss, for example, we might tend to say, oh, that must be, so hard for you, or, you must be really sad, or those kinds of things. And we think we're being empathic. But many of these kinds of responses assume that there is a universal response to human experiences, and that everyone who has had a certain kind of loss or a certain kind of experience reacts to it in the same way. And that's not true. Someone who's lost a spouse may be really, really devastated by that, and most people probably are, particularly people who've had good relationships, happy marriages, supportive families, but not everybody has happy and healthy relationships, and not everybody has a supportive family. So our response to losses can be very different depending on the kind of experience that we had in that relationship. So I'm going to give you an example of how I learned that. I was in my 30s. I was working at a family counseling agency as a therapist, and I was doing an intake with a woman in her 80s. And we got to the point where she had told me about her husband's Alzheimer's and his recent death. And something about the way she said it made me not want to do one of those, kind of typical, oh, that sounds so difficult response, but just to ask, and how did you feel about that? What was that like for you? And she looked at me with a really sort of funny look at first, and then she said, "Do you really want to know?" And I said, "Yeah, I really do want to know." And she said, "Well, to be perfectly honest, I was relieved. My husband was a control freak, and I often thought about leaving our marriage, but I had kids, and then I had grandkids, and I wasn't sure that I could make it on my own, so I just, waited until I thought the kids and grandkids were old enough, and then I was gonna make a life for myself." And then right at that time, he was diagnosed with the early stages of dementia. So I didn't feel like I could leave then, because then I thought everybody would think that, I was a really terrible person to leave my spouse. So, I hung in there. And then she said, he was kind of mean, but he wasn't all that violent earlier in our marriage. But when he got dementia, he got more violent. So I was really happy when I was able to put him in a home. And she said, but, I felt like people at the nursing home would be saying, well, his wife never comes to visit him, so I dutifully visited. And then when he died, I was really relieved. And so, and then she went on to say, and I get even emotional thinking about that. I just regret now that I did the dutiful wife thing for all of those years instead of having the courage to live the life I wanted, and now it's too late. So in my therapeutic relationship with her, what I realized was that what was really up for her first was this grief around the life that she never had an opportunity to have. And I think for older people, we often spend some or a lot of our time thinking about all of the roads that we didn't take, all of the things that we didn't have the courage to do, or the time to do, and that's also a grieving process. And so for this particular woman, she had to really work through that whole process before she was even able to admit, well, yeah, he wasn't all bad. Yeah, I was fond of him in some ways. And to do a little bit of grieving even for her husband. But none of that would have been accessible, I don't think, if she hadn't been able to really be allowed to say, honestly, it was a relief. So I think when we have conversations with people, we really have to be willing to let them say what they need to say, to be able to hear it, and to be able to let them define, what it is that they need now and what comes first. So I think another thing that we need to think about is to really focus on people's strengths when we're working with older people. Having somebody focus exclusively on your unmet needs and your deficits is disempowering, and it can be shaming. So we need to let people know that we see the whole person. We don't have to avoid talking about their needs, but we can't put it first, front and center. And then I think we also have to assume that our own experience and have to not assume that our experience or the experience of other people we know qualifies us to understand this particular person's experience. People's problems are complex and unique, and the person you talk to is really the expert on the problem. They have the most information, they have the most self-understanding and the most experience that's needed to deal with the problem. Even if they're limited in some ways, Many people have spent hours, days, weeks, and years thinking about their problems. And so, they don't need you to come up with a solution within the first 5 minutes. That can be a little bit insulting to people. So instead of immediately offering advice or trying to problem solve, it's really important to ask the person what kinds of solutions they've considered, what they've tried, how it's worked, where they feel stuck or incapable, and what they think they need to move forward. And again, I think we can do this, in different ways with people who have different levels of capacity. But I think it's always good to, first develop a relationship and then to see the person as a resource as we try to begin to work on whatever it is that is causing difficulty for that person. So, viewing helping as a collaboration rather than as something that you were doing to or with the person is really important when you're working with older adults. And then the last thing that I'd like to say, and I think one of my fellow panelists touched on this, I think older adults can bring a lot of strengths to our conversations. I think overall, in the process of aging, we tend to gain a greater acceptance of ourselves and of others. We have greater experience and understanding of the world and of other people. We have greater humility. And I think we have a tendency to have a less instrumental approach to connection, meaning that we become less competitive and less concerned about impressing and making use of others. So older people can really be fabulous conversation partners and great friends. And so I think it's really important that we have conversations that with older adults that honor their wisdom and our experience, and their experience even when we're speaking with people who have or who we perceive to have diminished capacity. Again, I want to emphasize the importance of listening in establishing a relationship, and attending to the impact of society's prejudices and stereotypes, and the person's expectation that they might be judged or misunderstood or devalued as we begin to develop those relationships. But as the relationships develop, older people are quite capable of engaging in reciprocal relationships and conversations where everybody's perspectives and needs and feelings can be discussed and understood. So I guess I sort of want to say last that it's my view that everyone can benefit with relationships with older adults. And if you don't have older adults in your life, you're missing something really valuable. And so in Amherst Neighbors, the group that I am involved with, the wonderful group I'm involved with, we view, for example, our volunteer services as being beneficial to both the volunteer and to the person receiving the service, because we all gain a great deal from connecting with another human being, and also with being of service to people in our society. And older people can and do that. And those of you who are not older people can and do that with older adults and really benefit from that. So.
I was just going to say, Jane, that we have a mixed audience here with us. We have maybe folks who are in relationships with older adults, and we have our representees from our older adult population here. And I saw heads nodding and like, that heck yeah, Jane. Value, wisdom, very important. Go out and get that relationship, because there's so much to learn from giving space and helping people honor their truth and what they want to say, and that curiosity, right? being in a relationship with someone else with curiosity to hear what they have to say, what they lived through, and then what you can learn from what they tell you. Thank you. Okay, Tammy,
Okay.
go.
I'm
Sex
going.
and love and meaning making.
Okay. As I said, healing happens in relationships, and connection is critical. And I know I've talked a lot about sex, but it's not just about sex, right? It's intimacy, it's friendship, it's love. And all of those things are just critical for meaning making and connection. You know, and I do know that many people have had losses and have lost a spouse or maybe single, and I totally know that is hard to meet people. So for making meaning of experiences, many older couples find greater satisfaction in their lives, in their sex lives, than they did when they were younger. They have fewer distractions, more time, more privacy. The kids are gone, maybe long gone. Although the average age kids leave their homes now with their parents is 28. So some people's kids may be around if you had kids later in life. And great thing is no worries about getting pregnant. They may be able to better express what they want and need and can have greater intimacy and connection. But remember, you can have deep connections beyond an intimate partner or someone that you're in love with, and the more connections you can surround yourself with. And I do understand that many people are isolated, so I would suggest that you step out of your comfort zone and find some new opportunities to widen your circle. You could join an active adult community, which I'm assuming many of you are part of this active community. If you are single or sadly widowed, maybe you'll meet someone to fall in love with. Maybe you'll meet someone to have sex with. Find places to meet people. Take classes. You could take a class on sexuality and relationships.
Are you offering that, Tammy?
I probably could. Foster intergenerational connections. You know, it's great to have connections with peers, with you know, people we see all the time, you know, around people our age. But those intergenerational connections are critical because older adults are the wiser people. Older adults have so much lived experience, and there's so much knowledge that can foster mutual understanding, learning, and sharing of diverse perspectives. And always remember, it's okay to talk about sex and love. Encourage storytelling and reminiscing as a way to connect. Engage in creative arts. Explore self-expression as a way to connect. And, you know, some of these things you might meet good people that will become good friends. You might meet someone who would become a partner. Just cultivate a sense of community for yourself, which I know can be challenging. If you don't do it, consider volunteerism or mentoring. You know, ways to have new experiences, but also ways to widen your circle. And, you know, greatly value the relationships and the connections that you have now, and see how you could expand those. You know, you have these connections, they may have other connections or friends, and you could widen your circle together. You know, don't hesitate to think about creating an informal support group. It could be a group to talk about sex and love for older adults. You know, I just want to express again how important those connections are. You know, your emotional wellness, it helps so much. Obviously, we know being isolated and not having those, whether love relationships, friendship relationships, it really has an impact on your physical health and your emotional wellness. The last thing that I want to say is that I have hope for the future. There's more older adults than ever. Right now, the U.S. population over the age of 65 is more than ever. It's 55.8 million, which is about 17% of the population. Americans over the age of 100 is projected to quadruple over the next 3 years. I know we won't all be around. I may not be around because I'll be 84 in 30 years. But just people are living longer. There's going to be more older adults. You know, I'm just hopeful that there'll be more conversations and that there could be some societal changes. So again, people over 100 is going to quadruple over the next 3 years. There's about 101,000 people over 100 right now in the United States, and the projections are that it's going to be about 422,000 people over 100. So I believe in strength in numbers. I believe we can keep having these conversations and really support each other to have meaningful connections in their lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tammy. We're going to kickstart it here, right in the Pioneer Valley, Western Massachusetts,
let's do it.
right?
Let's do it.
And Maureen, to wrap up this particular segment of our day, and thinking from your chair and your expertise in grief and loss, your thoughts around meaning making, how people can engage in the conversations around meaning making, and thinking about grief and loss, or anything else you'd like to add as your thoughts come.
I'm of two minds. That's a topic that's like, don't get me started. I could be here for such a long time, and I'm also reading the room and feeling like we've been sitting for a long time, so I'm gonna be a little condensed. But those words, meaning making, are actually ones that David Kessler, an author, came up with. He is an author who did years of work studying with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she came up with those initial 5 stages of grief that got burned into all of our brains, that we now understand do not go in any kind of a linear fashion at all, but tend to sort of go circular and very nonlinear. But he came up with, after she died, he continued his work, he came up with the next stage of grief after acceptance is meaning making. That's what we're left with after we've dealt with the loss of what has this person meant to me? What has this relationship meant to me? What does it mean to me? For me, it meant writing a book to try to help other people dealing with loss. But that's sort of the very essence of kind of where you go next in grief and loss. And I think that, people don't have to write a book. They don't have to start a podcast. We've already touched on some of the very wonderful, time-honored from when we were cavemen and women sitting around a fire, ways of dealing with our life, which is just talking to each other and listening to each other. I think that we talked a lot today about invisibility. I think being seen is incredibly important, and I think we've also heard the whole afternoon today, being heard is incredibly important. And one of the ways our brains learn to cope with loss is by telling the stories over and over and over again. There's a lot of research right now about the brain actually needs to remap its understanding of our world now with this change that's happened. And that remapping happens by telling the story and having new experiences and having to get used to the new experience with the change now happening. So it's the importance of the simple act of talking and listening, which we've been talking and talking about. It all boils down to that. I don't think there's anything new under the sun about that. Being a writer, I really encourage people. I didn't start out thinking about myself as a writer at all. I just have kept journals since I was a kid, and just kept journaling and have had a lot of loss in my life, a tremendous amount of loss in my life. But writing is what's sort of gotten me through it. Journaling is what's gotten me through it. So I really encourage people. There's lots of books out there now about journaling where you can sort of have a little session with yourself. And sort of what I say about it is I write to understand what I'm thinking and to figure out what my questions are and to listen for my own answers. So I encourage that as one form. You can buddy with another friend and either write together and read or not read. You can get together and buddy and just listen to each other. How's your week been? and just listen without necessarily commenting, without necessarily fixing, but just creating a safe space to check in with each other. So there's lots of ways that we can go with creating those informal ways to just connect. But I think one other thing I wanted to say about the takeaway is, I don't think any of these conversations has to constantly be the heavy, deep, and real. There's lots of ways to connect around grief and loss. There's lots of ways to connect around isolation, around sex and love. Just checking in briefly, or just mentioning something we saw on TV last night, starting a little thread of a conversation. Everything doesn't have to be an epic conversation, which is kind of what it can sound like sometimes from this seat. So just, we're all doing our best, and that's how we get there. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, so when we think about everything, everyone, every human, every person, you're individual, like snowflakes. I like snow. Unfortunately, it's too warm for snow. But every snowflake is different, and I look at that with the people that we live with, work with, socialize with, that are around us. Everyone has value, everyone is important, and that today we took the time to break some stigma around including and opening up the conversations that our older adults are wise. Sage stage of life wasn't by accident. We wrote that because we feel that way at the Pioneer Valley Coalition and at the Department of Mental Health. And we hope that this is the start of something that we can bring throughout Western Mass and maybe across the state of Massachusetts. We live in a Pioneer Valley, so let's be pioneers around breaking this stigma and doing this. Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you so much, Tammy. Thank you so much, Maureen, for being here, sharing your time and your life story and your expertise. If you have questions, please feel free to bring them up, and maybe we can go through them up here. If you want to know more information, those kinds of things, please see Jen and I will help you with all that information. We're going to take about a 15-minute break. We do hope you can stay. We're going to have some breakout groups to talk really more in depth about each of these categories and the conversations that might have been stirred up in your thoughts while you were listening this morning. Grab a cup of coffee, have some snacks, and we will continue at about 3:15 or so. Thank you.
Yeah, you did a great job.
We did it. High five. Hi.
Yeah, it was really great. Yeah, and your content was very good. Oh, thank you.
Queen Victoria started that. After Albert died.
Oh, you did? Do you like it? Yeah. 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 But you've noticed, right, that they're just regular looking people?
So true. We're very jealous.
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. Oh.
It's really so true.
Yeah. Yeah. At 12, it's so sad. And the social media is causing and I'm all for technology, but social media is causing so much damage to these kids. They're different kids than, all the previous generations. Yeah. Yeah. How far is that from here?
Oh my goodness. Right.
Oh, that is a drive. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. But you could probably find somewhere closer that was a good adult community,
I couldn't
Yeah.
society.
Out there. Yeah. Yeah.
We have Friday,
Okay. Yeah.
down days now.
Nice to meet you, Pat. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
It's been lost in that, I
Yes, I hope so.
I know that feeling. I know after some of the loss.
Thank you. I tried my best to weave in as much as we could.
I'm walking around.
We could talk all day. Really, this is a topic that I think is so important. So this was our pilot program for this.
Yeah, I like even a little black ribbon around your
Choose how we,
like
map out
because
the
people are
day,
going to
what
ask
time
you,
it
what's
is,
that
maybe
ribbon
refine
about?
the questions online. We'd like to bring this to the afternoon.
Whatever. One way that one of my friends is doing that is she continues to wear her husband's wedding rings kind of rope around her neck. So people are always asking her, like, oh, what, they want to see.
And then they
it's
look
like,
at the Cape. There's people on the Cape who are like, we really want to know what you're doing.
we don't have an understood signal for that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. They're long and they're complicated, and I think that's a Celeste thing for sure. I think she likes
Sort of gone way in the other direction, so that these profound states of profound depth of grief feel inconvenient.
Absolutely.
Instead of feeling profound, they feel like we're bothered. And that's really messed up.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for coming up, Helena.
It's all so
And I'm sorry
important,
about
and you had everybody's interest, so nobody talks about it, so you might as well take the time to do that.
God every day that
Thank
he's
you.
still here.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Oh, you're such a pleasure to meet you. We did it. I'm so glad for us. It was great. That was great. Yeah.
I hope our paths cross again, but you never know. We might do some more of this
She
stuff.
said something about, would you be interested if it's a hit in doing more of them? And I said, sure.
Yeah, and she wants to really expand it, even talking about the Cape, so.
Yeah, I'd be in.
Yeah.
I just see it sort of as an extension of, I'm a clinical social worker, you are, I just see it as an extension of my work.
Yeah.
Just a different way of delivering it.
Yeah.
Great to meet you. Yeah, really good to meet you. Are you going to head out now?
Yeah,
We are too.
Yeah,
We're
when
gonna
I
get
asked
that.
Jen, she said we didn't need, Celeste is off.
no, that's
She
what
said
I
we
did.
didn't.
Thank you, ladies. It was very interesting
Oh, what's your name?
conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Corey, I'm the director here.
Oh, nice to meet you. What a wonderful event. I'm so grateful for being invited and
What a gorgeous facility.
oh, beautiful.
We love that. We're lucky.
Gorgeous.
Yes, it is beautiful.
I have a friend who just for family reasons moved from Hadley to Connecticut, and I'm going to text her this afternoon and say, Lisa, what were you thinking?
I live in Connecticut.
Oh, really? She just moved to
I
Guilford.
live in Suffield.
Oh,
That's
right,
so
'cause
I
you're
drive
kind of
every day.
closer. Yeah.
Because I work with people
I
with
want to
disabilities.
get your book.
Oh,
Because I
okay.
work with people with disabilities. When I walked into the bathroom, it was like heaven.
Yeah, right.
Every stall handy. And I know that's the way it should be in senior centers, but some
But
of the
I do
older
want to ask
buildings.
you a very private, not private need,
Yeah.
but like, I don't know how to say it. We do not take people under 60 here. I
So
started
stop over
4
here
months ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I'm trying to change that, so I don't want this to go past you.
No, I promise.
wanted to ask you.
No worries.
So we had a woman who was participating in one of our classes. And she asked the teacher if she could bring her 4-year-old son as brain damage.
I'm sorry, her 4-year-old son
As
what?
brain damage.
Okay.
I would have said yes, because in my previous position,
Of course.
half of my population was disabled under 60.
Yeah.
So I told my staff today, you can't do that. You cannot do that. You cannot say, no, we can't accommodate. We have to see if we can accommodate.
Yeah.
So I went down, I keep pulling up all the ADA things. No, but we have an age restriction. It wasn't about the disability for them, it's about the age, and I can't get rid of them. And I'm thinking, but disability, I want to ask you if I'm correct in saying this, disability overrides an age restriction written on your...
It should. I mean, I'm not familiar with senior center.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to let you know before I leave. All right, thank you.
I'm not, I can't say I'm versed in senior center things, but it should. I mean, if you think about it, like subsidized housing is for people over a certain age, but they have to have a percentage of people who are disabled.
Anything that's elderly, there's disabled attached, right?
Yeah, I know. I mean, if there's anything I could do, I could give you my
Well,
card.
it's scary because I don't want to put it out there.
Yeah.
Someone-
Okay.
That's all I need. A new director after 12 months.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know there's places I could go,
Yeah.
but I don't know how much more I could put down for them to.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing journey. I was just curious. I think it's going to come to where we probably have to be called out before setting. Because even I talked to our town administrator.
Yeah. Oh, it's great that you're trying to do that, though. It really is great. I've worked also with people with brain injury for many, many years.
I had a stroke when I was 34. I had brain injury.
Oh my
I went back
God.
to school. And I
Wow.
graduated in 2017.
Good for you. That's young.
And school in 2012, that's when I started to go back, was the only rehab that helped my brain work. And I work differently, I think differently. I'm very expressive and feeling, I die. You know what I mean? Like I might be worried. I think bigger picture and I work backwards from there.
That's great.
But
I mean,
my brain wasn't always like that.
Yep.
And I love
But you've been able to turn it into a positive.
Right,
That's
yeah.
amazing. And I mean, I just met you, but I would never know you had a stroke.
See, that's why I take it personally.
Yeah.
I said, what do you think a disabled person wants to do? Nobody knows. I don't tell anybody because that would be a negative.
Yeah, there's such a stigma.
Like certain things are difficult for me. Like I go to the mailbox at the town hall and they have them all lightly labeled. And I still can't figure out what the boxes that I need because things like that, like directions. It looks like it's all in my mind. I used to get it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
And it's stupid because I can write a whole budget.
Yeah. Oh, it's so nice to me, and I'm grateful to come today.
Hi, everyone. Um, don't worry about sitting down, but if you could sort of come back to focus here. We're going to continue our program in a minute. Oh, did I go too early? I think I went too early. Yeah. So this afternoon, we're going to have 3 discussion groups from now until 4:15, and then at 4:15, we'll all come back in here for a wrap-up. But I'm going to introduce the folks that are going to run our discussion groups. Kelly over here is going to talk to folks about sex and love, and that will be all the way down the hall in the classroom down the hall. There's a sign on it. I'm going to talk about grief and loss in the classroom right out here and just to the left, like down the hall, and first one on the left. And Janisa and Risa are going to combine the topics of isolation and connection and stigma and emotional wellness, and they'll be in here. So if you could make your way to whichever group you prefer to be part of, we'll get those started, and then we'll all come back here at 4:15 for a wrap-up. Anything else? And there are signs on the door with the names of the groups. Anything else? Yeah, come see Jen, Karen, myself, if you have questions. Enjoy.
Let us know what kind of music question will happen. Grief is going to be outside. And connection and well-being. Don't we all? I could do some of that. I was going to say, I thought maybe we could, we could all sit up here, which would be horrible and weird, but maybe we could grab some chairs. Yeah, do like some kind of semicircle. We'll just give them a few minutes to self-select in. Oh, geez. Be in that picture.
Yes. Cards. Oh, good. I'm still getting adjusted to that new crisis line. I don't know how this place that you can make that picture. Go back. All kinds of things. Magnets, cards. Yeah, yeah. I need to really re-up. I've been a little slow to getting all the stuff. Losing my beloved crisis team over in Salem, where I used to just send people over there. So, grief and loss. So I'll get some new materials. Okay, well, thank you.